Buongiorno, I'm Dan Margulis. I'm sitting here in a classroom in Italy recording a bunch of videos for the book that we're producing. The first video that I'm doing is a very easy one. It's just going to involve the installation of a panel that's necessary to work in our workflow in the most efficient way. This is the PPW panel. If you've never seen a configurator panel before, this is going to be a rather sophisticated version of it. So I'm about to load it into Photoshop. I've gotten myself a trial version of Photoshop in English, so I can do this in the English language rather than Italian. And I've just gotten from the development team a new beta version of version 3 of the PPW panel, which I hope will load without any incident, because supposedly our installer is foolproof. It knows what version of Photoshop you've got. It finds a lot of things in your system, and it installs all the documentation and all the actions. So nobody could possibly screw this up, except possibly me. At any rate, I'm ready to go now. So at the moment, it's not loaded into Photoshop. Photoshop is open. And I will prove that it's not there by going to the window extensions window, and you see that there are a couple things like mini bridge are here. I'm going to be adding a brand new extension, and to do that I have to quit Photoshop. So there it is. And on the desktop I have found this installer, and all I should have to do is double click it, and if it's working properly it's going to bring up the Adobe Extension Manager. So let's see. Here it is, and I want to check to make sure that this is an extension manager for the version of Photoshop in which I want to install it. So this is CS6, which is right. I want to put it into CS6, but I could put it into CS5 if I wanted to. Okay, I accept. Am I sure I want to install this? Yes. And this is just going to be for me? Or no, it's going to be for all users on this machine. Okay, install. And I need my password. There it is. And that should be all there is to it. So the thing shows up here. I'm now going to quit the extension manager, and I now will boot up Photoshop, and we should have it all ready to go. Okay. We've now installed this PPW panel, and I'd like to make sure that it works because it is a beta version. Beta versions have been known not to work. So here we go. To see whether it's installed in the system properly, I've called up Window Extensions, and again, you have to reboot Photoshop before this will happen. I've done so. Here's the panel. It works. Okay, you see the picture of the handsome instructor there, and we have a bunch of Photoshop commands available, also a great many actions, and that's usually the reason we want to employ this panel, to apply certain actions. So let me call up an appropriate file like this one. I'd like to make sure the panel works. I'm just going to use Gaussian blur just to make sure that, for example, these commands are all accessible. So that certainly is accessible, Command Z. And now I'm going to apply an action. The action that I'm going to apply is this being taken in Italy, the land of romance. I think it needs a more romantic looking sky, which would be something a little bit bluer, a little bit darker than this. So we've got an action that does that. It's right here. Let's see if it works. Bingo. That's probably a little bit too much for my taste, so I would reduce the opacity of it. And now I'm going to compare. There's the original version. There's the one with the action applied to make a little bit of a darker sky. And for me, that's satisfactory, so I would call it quits here, go on to other steps of the workflow and all that kind of thing. It's an interesting panel. Right now, it works in Photoshop 5 and 6, which are the only two recent versions we've got. It's not compatible with anything before Photoshop 5, although you can load the actions separately. You can also load the documentation separately, and I'd like to show you some of the documentation that we have here. So if you'd like to know what went on with this action here, and it's a rather deep action, you can go to the Help panel, and the installer has installed a gaggle of PDFs here which tell everything there is to know about all these actions. So here was the action that I just used, and here comes the documentation. Okay, so there's a whole lot of information in here that the installer installed it all. You don't have to download it manually unless you have something earlier than Photoshop CS5. And this should give you all the information you need. I hope so, because I'm not planning to support this. It is freeware. You should be able to make it work for yourself. Our earnest hope is that we will be able to make this available for subsequent versions of Photoshop beyond CS6, but of course nobody knows what the future holds. Configurator so far has been version specific. That is, the products prepared for CS5 do not work for CS6 and vice versa. Presumably in the future that'll be a little bit better. Actions by themselves, they do work in all versions of Photoshop provided the commands are supported, and all these actions use pretty old commands, so they, as far as we know, they all can be used in any version of Photoshop from, say, version 7 onwards. But who knows? We can't tell you too much about the future. So anyhow, that's how you install it, and with this panel installed, it opens up a whole lot of possibilities for expediting the workflow.